You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Perth Property Show. I'm Trent Fleskins, your host as always. We've got Adrian Johnson back in the room to chat about those costs and risks and everything on the mistake side, I guess, of development. It's really easy to focus on profit and opportunity in property investment. That's what we're all optimistic people. But it's way more important to focus on mitigating the risks. If you can jump over those hurdles, you'll actually get to that profit. Adrian, thanks for coming in.
Morning, Trent. Morning, everyone. Thanks for having me back.
Costs and risks.
Where do we start? You see me sweating? I'm nervous already.
I think we need to start with just being probably as explanatory as possible about the cost structures of a build contract.
Yeah. How
that builds out, not just the widgets, the taps and the bench tops and things, but the site costs, all that. Let's break down a contract quote for us and what it will look like.
So probably the biggest issue with developments, it's obviously a normal home is hard enough, like you said, to break it all down, and site works is probably the hairy one that everyone gets confused with and sort of scratches their head, and how could you be that, and why is it not already in the home? I guess the reason being is every single block's different until you see it. You can't quote on it. It makes it pretty hard. But development's even harder because obviously you've got the site cost, but two, you've got civil costs. So, all of a sudden you start looking and saying, well, okay, we need to knock down the home. Great. Well, there's $20,000, $30,000 depending on what's required. Okay. Then basically we need to add new water meters. Then you've got to upgrade your power dome. Then you've got to have a power pole and box, which is like an adapter because, you've gone from 1 to 3, 4, 5, however many it is. So you've got all those costs. Then you've got your government costs. Yeah, you've got to cut into the junction of the sewer, feed that through, increase that size as well because of the volume that's going to be going through there. Same with the water. You can't run on that little standard water meter. You need to increase that size pipe to be able to cope with the volume to get through.
Drainage.
Yep, drainage, soak wells.
Tell you what, that's an expensive thing, isn't it?
Yeah, do you know what the funny thing is? That so we go back to the old, I've been around for a while, but back in my day, no one ever did soak wells. No one's required to do soak wells.
Wasn't a requirement, was it?
No, you
go
chuck
straight to the drain.
Most clients would chuck a tile underneath the drain pipe and watch their garden bit dragged away, and then they'd go, oh, bugger, I better go to Bunnings and sort this out. Yeah. But, I mean, half the time then, they'd, because, blocks weren't really building, and they'd put the soak well underneath their neighbour's block, and go, well, that's that sorts out that.
But it wasn't as dense a build back in those days, was it?
And that's the key. So the problem is that there's a couple of things. One is the councils obviously realise that when you get water, and if all the water from the units gets dumped onto the driveway, and the driveway slopes down onto the road, and that road has to cope with all that extra drainage and water, their drains start blocking up. Also, the water running on the bitumen starts wrecking it, damage. So they've realised it costs them money. So now they've basically put that back and the liability back onto the owner of the block and sort of said, no, any water that comes down, like rain.
From the roof?
You need to contain that and resolve it. So, and the other issue is that, back in the day when you'd have a 700,000 square metre block and you'd have this little 3x1, you had that much land that the water soaked away. It wasn't an issue. Now you're turning around and saying, well, like prime example, the home's not that much bigger. No, but you got 4 of them. Let's say 1,000.
You got 600 square metres of roof on 700 square metres of land.
Yeah, let's take a typical 720 square metre lot that you put 3 homes on, and you do 180 square metres of paving because you got 120 for your driveway, turnaround circle 36.
Not a lot of soil left, is there?
No, each courtyard, because everyone wants an alfresco courtyard. So there's no grass, there's no soil. So there's nowhere for that water to drain off. And you're basically, that entire lot is catching and collecting the water. So the council now sort of says, every single home needs to have the soak wells, the driveway needs to have all the soak wells, and all that water needs to be
How much does that
contained.
number normally look like for a triplex, for example?
So it varies significantly. So if you're along the beach, so if you're in the typical areas, let's say from Yanchep to Mandurah, your beach, then you could probably look at 15 grand.
Is that because of the soil type?
Typical triplex site. Yeah, exactly, because the soil, beach sand obviously just
very
drains.
Porous.
Porous and just drains away. As soon as you start heading inland, you hit areas like Beckenham, Cannington, we can be looking at $30,000 to $40,000
because it's clay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've had a quad site in Gosnells and it was 110,000 just for soak wells.
Yeah, wow.
So the client was looking, going, the house is cheaper than the soak wells, Adrian. And I was like, yeah. And even then, we will get it certified by an engineer, and the council can still turn around to us and say, no, we want more. And there was a reason for this, especially in those areas. So basically in Cannington, there was a street, and all the whole street got flooded, all the homes got flooded, and all the residents basically came together and did a class action against the council, saying that they were liable, that they should have enforced and been responsible and made the clients aware that they required better soak wells, so that didn't happen. And they won. So, of course, all the councils are on the back foot going, well, once bitten, twice shy. If you're making it our responsibility, well, then we will make it
your responsibility.
Yeah, and they basically put it back to make it even more intense than required, because obviously they're like, well, yeah, we could do it at this level, but if there's still a chance, we'll double that again.
1 in 100 flood.
Yeah. And it's not our problem then, is it?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
retaining?
soak wells is fun. Retaining is always a killer. No one likes it. Developers hate it because it's pretty hard to justify if you're renting or selling to a client saying, well, it cost me $100,000 in retaining. They're like, can't see it.
Well,
It's under the ground.
People used to use asbestos fences, they're retaining, right?
The old long drop sheets, yeah. So, I mean, you had the Super 6, which was a long drop sheet, and council would allow you to hold up 300, so 30 centimetres of your neighbour's boundary on that sheet. Obviously, the Super 6 company worked out that they didn't make much money out of that. It was better to go to the cheaper ones. So they got rid of those sheets, which then made the Shire turn around and say, well, okay, we'll have to change our requirements to 150. So if the level of a site changes by 15 centimetres, they require us to retain whoever has changed those levels. So
we can be talking about limestone blocks or concrete panel and post.
Panels, brick build-ups, utilising the house and all the rest of it.
Brick build up, so just the house wall used as a retaining wall. So if it's on boundary.
Yep, you drop it down, and sometimes depending on how much you drop it down and build the brickwork up to support it, or you might do a cavity fill and drop in concrete to actually support it that way. So going back to our last episode, we were mentioning areas like in the northern areas. They're a prime example again because of those were all beach blocks and
very
all
undulating
beach sand dunes.
Yeah.
So, and back in the day, where now you've got your Cedarwoods, your Sadleys and all these guys, they give you flat, clean, prepared lots, which still get hit with site works and everyone scratches their head about, but they still get hit. They're already retained, they're already done. Back in the day, it was up to you. So I can remember when my parents were building in Hillary's and Woodvale and those areas, and they would go in there and have to work out what they were going to do. Then they'd have to work out if a neighbour's going to be building.
The house would be retained. You'd see the limestone blocks under the house and not... Whereas these days, the block is retained.
Yeah. I mean, look, the blocks under the house was more sort of the 50s when they were doing sort of the wood floors and things like that. More the other blocks, whether they retained or not. But again, back in the day, everyone tries to avoid costs. So that's why a lot of these lots we're having issues with developments now, because they haven't been retained properly or correctly. And I can remember owning a home 20 years ago in Carrinup, and looking at the wall at the back, which would have been a good probably 2 to 3 metre drop at least, and it was holding up an entire block, and my block back then was like 780 square metres, so decent sized block, and it was a single leaf wall running all the way down, and I was thinking, that's not really looking that great as it was starting to bow.
Yep.
And the neighbour and I were discussing, going, it's been there for a while, and hopefully it will still keep holding, but can't do that anymore.
So these site costs, for example, what would you say on average for a 700 square metre block, whether it's a duplex or a triplex? What are we looking at as a total number on top of the cost of the actual houses? Right. We're adding how much normally, as a normal sort of confidence interval?
As we sort of said, look, it's near impossible until you see it, and it's near impossible to give a precise amount. But, as a gauge, as a ballpark, like straight out there that you would think without even having to think, for a triplex, you're always going to say 80 to 100 grand is always required.
You're getting no house for that.
No, and that's the biggest issue, that a lot of times clients will phone up, and I think we discussed it last episode, and you said, you see these cheap homes advertised saying that, it's 140 grand and built in 26 weeks and come on in and it's wonderful. And of course people think, I'll just grab 3 of those and make some money here. This will be easy. And we get clients phoning up, and obviously everyone's nervous and don't really want to divulge too much to you. So they're like, how much is the house price? How much are you going to do it for? And you're like, well, if I could just explain it, they're like, no, just give me the house. You're like, 130, boom, phone goes down. Yeah. They buy the property, come back to you and say, right, let's build 3 of those. You said it was 130, so that's 390. We should be all good. and then you come back and say, well, it's actually now 500, and they go, well, where's the 110? I told you I only wanted 3 homes, and you're like, well, hang on, you got civil costs. Well, what's civils? Okay, they're all your government fees and charges. Whether you want to build or not, you have to pay those fees to develop the block, because you're developing the block, creating from 1 title to 3 titles. And as we discussed before, your sewer, your headworks, your power, all those things. So that's where your civils. Then you've actually got to prep the block, like you were saying. So, okay, what retaining were you going to require? Okay, what soak walls were you going to require? Okay, then we've got to actually physically build the homes, and then you've got to finish them as well. So that's where your cost jump. And if you go, that's
where your pre-feasibility really needs to be coming from experienced heads.
Yes.
You can't just look at these numbers and be ignorance is bliss, right?
Yeah, crazy.
That's the biggest risk in this game, is to not know what you don't know.
Feasibilities are so cheap, in comparison. So if you're going to invest $500,000 on a property and you're going to invest another $500,000 plus on the development, so you're $1 million plus, why would you not get, for a couple of grand, get feasibilities done and get it all professionally quoted and confirmed, rather than you saying, well, I don't really want to waste that money, because wasting $1 million is probably worse than wasting a couple of grand. I know personally, if I had a choice of spending a couple of grand and getting the certainty and assurance of what it's going to be, and even if it turns around it's a failure, sensational.
Yeah.
I've lost a couple of grand, which
you learned a lot
saved
of
me
things
a couple
as well,
of mil.
though. And you'll be able to use those learnings
100%.
towards the next pre-feasibility, or the next property you look at.
So when you finally get the one that does win, all that money you might have wasted on other developments that you thought were crazy and you stuffed up, we actually made a benefit, because now you've got one that is going to make you money.
It was applied learning. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd rather do that than waste $1 million and then turn around and say, well, it actually cost me a couple of $100,000 to learn.
Yeah, very, very true. And okay, so for that normal sort of 700 to 800 square meter block, once we've got $100,000 in site works and government
which
fees,
everyone loves to hear about,
but they're real, they exist. What are we probably seeing as costings just to get the rest of the build done?
So the actual build's okay. I mean, the build, that's the thing. I guess it's the same as, when we quote timeframes for people, the actual building of the actual home's quick, it's getting there. And the same with the actual development. The house prices work out pretty reasonable, pretty cheap,
What does a builder normally run on in terms of a margin? What are they targeting across the industry? It's a pretty similar game for every builder. So it's not like it's a trade secret of Summits or another companies.
No. I mean, look, depends. I mean, obviously every build is different. You're talking about Zorzi and someone like that.
Obviously their margins will be a lot higher because they offer a very specific product.
Yeah, 100%, exactly. And so everyone's different. So that's the thing. Your margins and your square metre rates always change, and that's the thing. Everyone always comes in wanting to know a square metre rate, and it's near impossible because of the different sizes and developments. But, your margins vary. Back in the day when things are good, you would probably say most builders were trying to work on 20 to 24% margin, and funny enough, it sounds like that's really good money. But the problem is, by the time you take out insurances, loss, breakages, theft on site, all these things, on average, it works out normally they make about 4%. So that's why they work on such high volume. Because, if you just did one house and you made 24% sensational, you'd all be like, well, great, don't worry about it, we'll go for a surf. But that's the problem, that when you take into account all the issues and dramas and everything they're taking on, even to the point of warranty, you take on a lifetime structural warranty, if you come back in 10 years and need all your roof fixes and all the rest of it. So
that's on you.
Yeah, it's on us. And, you can't just go, well, we'll pull that out of nowhere. So you've got to allow for all that in those costs to cover yourselves to be able to keep maintaining. So back in the good times,
what does that
3 or 4,
margin push down to these days?
Look,
against
it can
industry?
float between 12 to 16%.
Yeah, wow. So it just demonstrates that for that same house, and probably you're getting a better house now with better trades.
Do you hear
the
that
ones
deep,
that are
deep
still
sigh?
there.
That was the pain.
Yeah, look, that's the industry. Where a lot of businesses have taken haircuts to be able to keep their doors open
Across the board.
Yeah, you're looking at being able to develop that same development now compared to 5 years ago for probably about 10% cheaper, and you should really be expecting that you've got the best traders in the market right now, the most skilled trades being the ones who are hired by the building companies.
And this goes back to when we were talking, I think last episode we mentioned on maybe getting cheaper prices and recessions and things like that. So if you're down to 12 to 16 and people are still saying, well, that's a heap of money, but if I said to you before we're on 20 to 24 and we're only coming out at 4, none of those theft and issues
Change,
change and loss on site have changed. So that breaks it down to most of the companies are probably not making anything, which is why...
They're just keeping the doors open right
Yeah,
now.
realistically they are. They're just sort of like a duck paddling, keeping afloat, and then they're waiting for the market to turn, and then that's when they can come back and say, okay, great, we'll get the 4% and we get high volume, all of a sudden no problems. We're all, as my wife always tells me, she goes, you're in champagne and razor blades, and at the moment you're on razor blades, but champagne will come back sooner or later.
Yep. So I think what it demonstrates is when you're in a time like this where the builders are probably as tight as they've ever been and probably ever could be going
probably
forward.
Probably in 30 years, yeah.
You probably want to be sticking, in my opinion, to those builders who have got the track record of being able to stick around. And they've got the business.
Keep the doors open.
They can, because what's even worse than feeling like you didn't get the best price was getting halfway through a build and being with a builder who shuts up shop.
So
I've seen it happen in the boom.
Yeah, I've had 3 or 4 clients that we quoted on, and they came back, and this is going back 2-3 years ago when the market was going crazy. Since then, it's calmed down because the market changed in midway through 2014, 2015, 2016 was crazy, and that's when I think people were really, really hurting, and we were getting a lot of little builders and other guys coming in and just quoting crazy amounts, like let's rough, quick, silly numbers, but let's say you were looking at a duplex for 550 grand all in, everything done, and the client would come back and say, well, they can do it at 420, and we're thinking it's impossible. And then all of a sudden I'd see them in 9 months' time, and they'd say, oh yeah, that guy took my deposit, took 2 of my first payments. I got the slab down, I didn't get the bricks up, I still paid him, he's now closed. And what they were doing is like a pyramid scheme. They were basically saying, well, I'll just get these guys in, I'll never touch their home or finish it, but I'll take his money and I'll use it to finish off my other ones, hoping I get through this. And of course they don't. So then they'd come back and say, oh, it's your lucky day, Adrian. You've got the deal, we're going to come back to you. Problem is, you're saying, well, that's great, but firstly, we don't want it because we don't know what that guy's done. You're asking us to give you a lifetime structural guarantee and look after it. We've got to work out what he's done. It could be poor, shoddy workmanship, which then means that's on us. Or do we demolish it and start from scratch?
Yeah, exactly right. It'd be easy to start from scratch.
You don't want to take on these issues and problems. It's just not worth it. So that's one. That's a problem. So a lot of builders go, no, don't want it. 2, well, you bought it 420, you're not going to get that price. It's 550. So even though you've got insurance only unfortunately covers you for that proportion paid out. So you got to find another 100 grand plus to get back in. So most of the clients were like devastated because they're like, well, I probably shouldn't have done it. You're like, no, if you couldn't afford it at that price, don't take the cheaper price. You're 10 times worse off.
So that for me would be probably the biggest risk that I think developers should be mitigating and perceiving right now at this point in time, is making sure that if they are an astute developer, they see that it's a good time to start that process, lock down that fixed price build contract, do it with a very established builder. If it's not Summit, it's a building company that's got just as good reputation and financial backing.
100%.
So that at least you know that as long as you're happy with the price and the quality you're going to get, it's going to be finished.
It's a pretty good time in the marketplace at the moment because, as I sort of said, a lot of those little guys all got wiped out. A lot of the builders that weren't up to scratch have all sort of been moved on, and it's also like we're saying, the trades
as well.
exactly. Back in the boom, you'd have an Irish guy roll up and say, "Oh, I'm a bricklayer, and have you ever laid bricks? No, but I'll lay them. Pay me $2 a brick, and off we'd go." Those guys aren't around anymore. If he is, then he's a good bricklayer. He's still around. The guys that just decided to put their hand up to try and make the most of the marketplace have been and gone because there is no marketplace, and that's the same with most of the builders that are around at the moment. As we discussed, there's a few builders, there's probably 3 or 4 that are large builders and have been bought out and have been backed now. So we're in a pretty good place. I think most of the players that deserve to be here are here and should be running forward. So
for someone who's possibly sitting back right now wondering whether it's good enough time to speak to a builder about that initial consultation,
call me.
Call Adrian. What would you say would be a couple of easy sort of back of the envelope ways to get an understanding of, look, if I already have the property, maybe it's my own home, are there any ways to maybe estimate what those costs would be?
There is for me.
Is it as easy as going into the builder and just starting that conversation?
Yeah, it is. And that's the conversation we have. So we don't want to waste their time or our time. At the end of the day, it's about being open and it's about having good communication and working with people. And that's what I try and set off. It's not about trying to lock them in or not tell them anything or try and hide figures, because at the end of the day, as we've discussed, it's a year year and a half plus more that you're spending. So
it's a relationship.
Yeah, 100%. It's not like I can quickly tell you that this is the best car you'll ever drive. You drive it around the block, you sign it, you drive out, and I go, too bad, I don't have to see you again. Whatever I tell you, I've got to back up, because for the next year and a half, we're still seeing each other and talking. So it's not like I can turn it around. So that's why, we're pretty blunt, and I'll be pretty blunt, from the start, and give you all the hard facts, because you might as well take the medicine when we first see you. And then if you can cope with that, then from there we can make it more of a positive ride. Whereas, if I'm trying to sell you this whole positive dream and tell you everything's wonderful, and then the whole time I'm on the back foot, that's just going to be painful for both of us. So I don't think either of us want that. So realistically, what we'll normally do is I'll sort of say to clients, look, give me your address, let me have a look at it, let me have a look at the issues to see where the concerns and the problems are, and then I can address them, and then I can come back to you with some ballparks. And exactly as we've been discussing on these podcasts, I'll give you quick time frames, I'll give you basically ballpark costs of where I think you'll be at, and then that way you can take that information, you can mull it over, you can see if that suits you and if that's going to work.
Yeah, balance it off against the comparable revenues in the 100%. Market right now.
Can come see someone like yourself and get the look to see if the bank's going to do it, the deal, see what the implications are, how that's going to affect you.
That's a good point. Financing of that deal.
That's the key thing. That's why.
Do you get a lot of people that get a lot of the way through with you, get their quotes ready to go, and they've not spoken to their bank, and then they go and speak to their bank and call you up a little bashfully and go, I'm really sorry, I can't even afford this. The bank won't even give me the money for this.
Look, I'm pretty lucky because we squished that straight from the start. So, look, to be honest with you, the first conversation is I'll give them ballparks. And the reason I do that is because I say, now you have something that, one, you can understand, you can see. Do you feel comfortable with sort of borrowing that money, outlaying that money? Does it stack up for you?
Does the bank feel comfortable?
And that's the key thing. If you think it works for you, go see the bank, because then that's the key essence. If they're not going to do anything and can't do anything, then there's no point in pursuing
we can't help
further.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's why we'll always say, first step, this is where roughly we think you're going to be around. Are you comfortable with that? Great. Whether you're comfortable or not, doesn't matter. It's more the bank. But you've got to be, I guess, first comfortable with it to then approach the bank, start pursuing them and harassing them to see how to make it work. So once that's in place, then we go. So we're pretty lucky that, to be honest with you, when the market first turned, with the banks turning, that was probably the biggest issue, because people were so used to getting money, and especially sort of the older clients that turn around and say, look, I've got 3-4 properties, I've got a heap of equity, money's not a problem, son. It's, don't worry about it. And, you're trying to tell them to suck eggs, saying, guys, I'm telling you now, go
make the call.
Do it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'd have to relate that I had a story where I had a wealthy client that's probably, equity-wise, 10 to 15 mil, but was retired, so he was just taking 50 grand a year to sort of run. He didn't really need much, and he was just sort of sitting back. Went to need an extra mil to just cover off a project we were going to do. When I saw the bank and said, look, just flick me an extra mil based on that, and they turned around and said, no, you
can't service it.
Yeah, equity, we're not interested anymore. It's serviceability, because the government's making us liable, that if we lend you that money, whether you're worth that equity or not, if the market crashes and it's no longer worth that, you had no ability to ever pay it back, so then we're liable, so we're not going to take the risk. So as soon as the government made the banks liable, that's when the banks bailed out. Whereas before that, the client was liable. It was the client's responsibility. If you wanted to take that risk on, well, then you had to cop it. But they turned around and said, no, the banks should be more responsible. Well, yeah, okay, so there's give and take with that. But that's also caused the issue with the market, that they've turned around and probably backed off too much. Saying,
the supply of credit
panic.
Obviously has a big effect on the ability to do a development.
Yeah.
We'll have a chat in the next episode about really just building for investment, how that might change between building to sell straight away versus building to rent, and what the spec level really needs to be at different price points these days to attract that market, whatever it is you're looking to do at the end of the development.
100%.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks again for having me.
Okay, Suburb Spotlight time. We are talking about the rather small but family-orientated suburb of Hamersley, nestled in between your Careens, Warwick's area. City of Stirling suburb, which is interesting on the development side. One agent to talk to. As always, it's our number one for the suburb. It's Ben Barber from Sprague and George. Ben, thanks very much for coming in.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
If you can give me a sentence to describe the lifestyle of Hamersley, what would it be?
Families. Definitely predominantly families are living through the area, and seem to be the buyers that we're seeing always seem to be families sort of coming through and looking to take advantage of the big blocks.
Do you think that is why the zoning of the area reflects really not much opportunity for development?
Yeah, I think City of Stirling is trying to keep big blocks just to make Hamersley and even Careen draw cards for those big blocks, and I guess less development in your surrounding areas is a good thing.
Hamersley is a suburb that is split straight down the middle in terms of demographic, socioeconomically, I should say.
Yep.
Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, I mean, most buyers consider Hamersley to be in two parts. You've got the eastern side of Hamersley and the western side by Arundel Road. Demographically, though, it's similar buyers, but some people do draw a line in only wanting to be the western side of Hamersley, even though the eastern side of Hamersley does have bigger homes and newer homes.
So and that's pretty evident in a lot of suburbs up the north coast, that the eastern side, in a lot of ways, less sought after, but actually it's a newer estate and the houses are a bit nicer.
Yeah, well, a lot of buyers come across and they ring me saying, I don't want to be west side of Hamersley. But then you show them a couple on the eastern side of Hamersley and they go, oh, wow, the designs are better. They're bigger rooms. Like you get built-in robes, which a lot of the time you don't get in the 70s houses.
Yep.
So it sort of evens out a little bit that, yes, location-wise, it's somewhat more sought after on the western side. And if you go to the eastern side, you actually get some bigger homes and newer homes and double garages and a few bits and pieces.
That's just a function of the fact that back in the day when the developers of the estate first started, they would have started on the west where they could probably get a few sales off a bit quicker and you're heading down the freeway, and it would have finished off in the east, which at the time would have possibly been the least desirable suburb given location and access.
Yeah, absolutely. And the first part of Hamersley was the western corridor, which was all late 60s, but most of them early 70s. And then the parts east of Arundel Road started early 80s. So you do get a lot of those 80s builds, and therefore a bit more modern as far as what we consider nowadays to be open plan and whatnot.
I want to hear a bit of history. Give us Hamersley's history, a little bit of a fun fact.
The first lots were sold in Hamersley in 1968. There was an auction on Ardley Crescent where 76 lots were sold at an average of $4,700 per lot. And that was sort of the initial creation of Hamersley as a suburb.
Tell you what, a bit of price growth since then.
Yeah, it's changed a little bit, as you'd hope, I suppose, if you've sat on the property for 45, 50 years. But
that's not a bad investment. If you put an investment down in the late 60s, 50 years later, you'll have an investment that, obviously with a house on it, but that wouldn't have cost that much more for the house at that time either.
Yeah, true.
Would be worth 100 times the amount.
Yeah, you'd be pretty happy with yourself, especially if you've got the patience to sit on it for that long as well.
Yeah. I think if you had that locked in, that wouldn't be too bad.
Yeah, why not buy all 76 of them?
Well, if I had a $500,000 house in Hamersley right now, I'd be pretty happy with it being worth $50 million in 50 years from now.
Well, absolutely. Having said that, I live in Hamersley, so I might be holding on to mine.
Okay, so as you said, they started off in the 60s, moved through into the 70s.
Yep.
So explain again that seller that is your main client.
So most of my sellers I seem to be coming across are the people looking to downsize. So the 730 square metre blocks are getting too much for them. So a lot of people looking for some smaller options.
Were they a lot of them the original owners?
Yeah, come across quite a few of the people are original, or at least people that have been there for 20 years, and they're just getting to that point now where they can't maintain the pool or the garden, and just looking to get something that's smaller and get something that's easier to upkeep as well.
And the buyers are really just their kids?
Yeah, a lot of people that did grow up in the area. There's a lot of people that grew up in sort of Ukraine and Duncraig and can't quite afford to get into those areas just yet. So using Hamersley as sort of a bridge to get into those areas. But a lot of really well-educated, nice families coming back in the area, which is great. A lot of young families that are looking for that backyard for the kids.
Why would I move into Hamersley as a suburb instead of, say, a Warwick or a Kingsley or a Greenwood, those sort of areas? Is it the proximity to the city that a lot of people are attracted to?
Yeah. Well, proximity to the city is a good one. But I think the main reason is you can buy knowing that your neighbours aren't going to have the opportunity to bowl over and put three on. So a lot of people that are looking in Warwick have now sort of moved across to looking in Hamersley because they don't necessarily want the neighbours having the option of putting a triplex
They
on.
don't want the urban infill.
No, they want to make sure the big blocks are staying, at least for now. And then down the track, if things change, then they can sort of move from there.
To be frank, I don't see that happening anytime soon. I don't see Hamersley being pegged by the City of Stirling. They've got a lot of other things to worry about as a development suburb. Clearly, they've excluded Hamersley in their plans up until now, and Careen, for those very reasons of family lifestyle. They're not zoned for not even a split into two, unless you're on a corner block, which we can talk about soon. Yeah. They're not even zoned for that. Clearly, there's an intentional policy made there that Hamersley is a family suburb and should remain that way.
Yep, absolutely. Hamersley and Careen are obviously the suburbs they've chosen. And, I mean, prime location. So something will change eventually, but there's no talk about it at the moment. I'm happy, having lived in Hamersley growing up and then also now as an owner, the fact that my owners next door can't bowl over and put three.
Yeah, of course. that lifestyle of that young family who come in to buy, what are they enjoying about the Hamersley lifestyle in terms of schools? Explain the lifestyle of Hamersley to someone who has never lived north of the river.
Sure. I think the draw card of Hamersley's parks. There's parks everywhere. You can almost walk down any street and there's families walking with the kids.
Maybe not this week.
Maybe not this week, no. 1.5 metres apart. They are still going for strolls. So it's a big draw card knowing that you can sort of take the kids out for a walk and enjoy the area. Not much traffic. It's just people that live in that suburb sort of using the area, which I think is a big draw card. You've got Warwick Shops, which is close by, and then you'd still do have that access to the Freeway train station.
Are the kids going to Careen? Is that where most of the
a lot of people want to go to Careen, but that's always subject to change. A lot of the kids do go to Glendale Primary School and East Hamersley Primary.
All right, price points. What are we paying? This is the thing. There's not many price points in Hamersley. They probably make a very similar income. Their houses are worth pretty similar. Their houses are pretty similarly spec'd.
Yeah, a lot of the owners are people that have come from similar backgrounds, but the young guys as well, and a lot of teachers sort of buying back in the area, which is good. And your price point, at $450, you'll need a fair bit of work. On the western side of Hamersley, you don't find them less than $460. I mean, you can get renovated 4x2s for around the 600 mark.
For 600,000, you could be looking at Duncraig and Careen. Yeah,
you can do. Yeah, I mean, obviously, what you're getting around the 600 mark has been extremely popular. We've had, especially the start of this year, was probably the best I've seen it. So I've had a number of corner sites come up, and we've had a few people that are the young first home buyers that are looking to build something new and easy to maintain. And I've also had people in Hamersley looking to downsize, so they've been looking to grab these half blocks they can build. You're still getting street front. You're still getting a 4x2 with a double garage. Still a lot of the old original 70s duplexes. I've got one for sale. About 5% of Hamersley are those duplexes that are still around, and pretty popular when they do come up and then look to upsize to something bigger.
What are they going for? Threes?
Low 300s, and then they sort of build up from there. Your 3x1s get towards your high 300s.
Subdivision opportunity.
Yep.
Again, there's not a lot, but it's the corner lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Give us an example of what that looks like from start to finish.
Yep, so your corner blocks, they're extremely popular at the moment. You get numerous inquiries straight away, which is great. Generally, a person can apply through the WAPC to subdivide that block, and you end up with two blocks around that sort of 370.
Do you think people are mainly getting in there, those people that are getting in there going, look, we'll buy it, we'll knock it down, we'll build our dream home on half?
It depends on the price point. A lot of the investors and developer side of things, they looking to grab them as an investment and then sort of subdivide and see.
Smarty pants, those guys.
Yes, they've been through the process before.
Yep.
They're good at it, and they know what the returns are going to be and how much the costs are going to be as well.
Of course, yeah. Median house, it's a pretty good yardstick for Perth, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So it's on par with most of Perth. I mean, your 520 is a good little price point, it's a good little entry level, especially if it's 700 square metres, 15 minutes from the city. It creates a good opportunity for buyers.
If you had $520,000 in your wallet today, Ben Barber.
Yes.
What would you be buying in Hamersley? Give us a street.
I would be buying... give us a street. Well, I live on Felstead Crescent. In my opinion, that's the most popular pocket of Hamersley, and I would be purchasing there again, but it's struggled to find a property in that pocket for $520 unless it's an older 3x1.
What's the best street you reckon you could get for $520 then?
You'd probably get one on Ardley Crescent, which was the initial startup street of Hamersley. There are some 3x1s that you can sort of get, even renovated 3x1s, and even maybe getting 3.2s for that $520. I've just recently sold a 4x1, which went for high 400s, and that was on 850 square metres, so good sized block. You're getting for high fours, you can use that extra $20,000 to do a kitchen and a bathroom.
Okay. Bonus question.
Yep.
Non-really Hamersley related question, but just number one agent question.
Yep.
How has your experience of the market been this year, 2020? So if you can give us a bit of a storyline of how January, February, March, and now April has run for you as an observer and participant in the market.
I've found this year to be certainly my busiest year in my 8.5 years of real estate. Number of inquiries have been good. I've had 50 people through home opens again, which I hadn't seen for the 3-4 years before that. So starting in January, you'd sort of got, once we got past Christmas, inquiries sort of picked up, and then coming February and March, buyers were sort of getting to that point where they're hungry again and they're willing to compete for properties as well, which
hasn't happened for years, has it?
No. For the last 4 years, you've been looking for getting around the asking price. If you get the asking price, that's great. But now I've been putting from on a property, so it might be from $599, and the from's there because we're a chance of getting multiple offers and pushing above that. And I'd rather make sure buyers are aware that the from's there, because if we do get competition, they may need to compete with another buyer for it, and therefore it might push slightly above.
And how's it been going the last couple of weeks? Obviously, we've seen a massive drop-off in transactions.
Yep. Yeah, so numbers have certainly dropped down, and a lot of owners have chosen to hold off selling their properties. We want to make sure that we get past the virus and what the outcome is, so they're a bit cautious about the uncertainty. But at the same time, we're going to see a shortage of listings as well. So whether that evens things out and properties keep ticking over. Yet to be seen. We'll wait and see how we go.
Are buyers still calling?
Yes. Yeah, still getting calls from buyers and still getting inquiries through realestate.com. Certainly not as much as what we were getting in that
6
January,
weeks
February,
ago.
March.
Yep.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Because, obviously some buyers would be impacted with job loss and whatnot, so they've had to go back to the drawing board. But still people inquiring, and obviously as an agent we have to make sure we're qualifying buyers before we take them through, because it is a lot more time consuming doing viewings by appointment.
Yeah, one at a time.
Yeah, so we have to make sure that we're not a time waster. They are there to
Seriously consider a purchase.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yep.
and that financially they can afford it as well. So we have to ask, unfortunately, harder questions that we would normally ask early, like what is your budget? And if their budget is well below the asking price of a property and we know our owners won't consider that, then we need to sort of start thinking about, is it worth wasting our owners' time and our time getting them through? And obviously wasting the buyer's time. If we know our owners fixed at a certain point and they won't consider lower, there's no point in me taking a buyer through that property.
That's a stark reality. It's a nice point you brought up there, is that the sellers aren't compelled to sell for lowball prices just because we're in the middle of a pandemic.
No.
People seem to have this idea that the second something like this happens, suddenly a house that would have sold 6 weeks ago for $500,000 will now sell for $400,000. Just because there might not be a buyer this week or next week or the week after at $500,000 doesn't mean the seller is compelled to sell it to you for $400,000, mate.
No, absolutely not. It just depends on the seller's circumstances. And in an area like Hamersley, where the person might have owned their house for 10 or 20 years.
They're probably not on their knees.
No, absolutely not. And
They probably have their mortgage paid off.
yeah, exactly right. And there's a lot of people that are looking to upscale. So they might be looking to purchase in Carina or Duncraig, and if they go start assuming that the one in Carina or Duncraig's going to drop 100, and therefore theirs is going to drop 100, it just doesn't quite work that way.
Yeah,
So
exactly right.
a lot of people will sit if they need to, and we have open conversations with it and find out what their reason for selling is, and that's a big part of helping them through the process as well.
I guess my message to buyers out there right now, if you are still an active buyer, you're probably an ambitious buyer, you're probably looking to pull some of the dynamic back in your favour that's been pulling back to the seller's favour this year.
Yeah.
And that's fair enough, but recognise that just because that we are in a pandemic, it probably means there's less competition, so you can probably take a bit more time to make a decision, which is great.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean you're going to be getting 20-30% bargains for the sake of it.
No, and talk to the agent about it as well, because we want to get sales through as well. So we're there to facilitate both the buyer and the seller.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking that you're going to be coming under the asking price, ask the agent, is it worth it? And if the owner needs to sell, the agent's going to be really honest with you about it, and therefore it's going to make the process a fair bit easier for both parties, both the buyer and the seller.
Ben Barber, thank you very much for your time today and your experienced feedback to our listeners on both Hamersley and the market. I look forward to seeing, hopefully, Hamersley having a good year by the end of the year, because it was primed for it.
Yeah, it was ready to go, and thanks very much for having me in. Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!